You open Temu because you need one thing: a phone charger, a replacement cable, something simple. 20 minutes later, your cart contains a portable blender, LED lights, a mini vacuum cleaner, wireless earbuds, and several products you don't even remember selecting. The total is $38. Somehow that doesn't feel expensive. A few decades ago, that reaction would have seemed strange. Filling a shopping cart with dozens of products usually involved trade-offs. You compared prices, removed items, and decided what could wait until next month. Today, millions of people browse Temu almost instinctively, adding products they never planned to buy. Some of the largest companies in the world are paying very close attention to that shift. Within just a few years, Temu seemed to appear everywhere. Super Bowl commercials, endless YouTube ads, TikTok videos showing giant hauls for the price of a pizza. By 2024, the platform had reportedly reached more than 185 million users in the United States alone. Growth happened so quickly that investors, analysts, and retail executives started asking a deceptively simple question: how was any of this possible? The deeper people looked, the stranger the numbers became. Many products appeared unbelievably cheap. Not cheap compared to competitors, cheap compared to the physical reality required to move them around the world. Think about the journey behind a single package. A product is manufactured in China, packaged in a factory, transported to a warehouse, loaded onto trucks, ships, or aircraft, processed through customs, sorted again, and eventually delivered directly to someone's front door. Every step creates costs. Every person involved expects to be paid. Yet analysts studying Temu's international expansion repeatedly arrived at a surprising conclusion. In many cases, the company appeared willing to spend more fulfilling an order than the customer had actually paid. For a traditional retailer, that would trigger alarm bells. Temu seemed comfortable treating those losses as part of a much larger plan. At that point, the story stopped looking like a normal retail success story. Prices that once felt suspicious gradually started feeling normal. Waiting for discounts became routine. Products that would have seemed impossibly cheap a decade earlier barely attracted attention. Expectations shifted. Consumers became accustomed to getting more for less and receiving it faster than ever before. That transformation didn't begin with Temu. The foundations had been laid. Decades earlier, long before anyone outside China had heard of Colin Huang. To understand Temu, you first have to understand a decision that many investors considered reckless. The story begins in Seattle during the late 1990s. Back then, Amazon was still fighting for survival. The company had survived the dot-com crash, but Wall Street remained skeptical. Investors wanted profits, analysts wanted discipline. Shareholders wanted proof that Amazon could behave like a mature business rather than an ambitious experiment. Jeff Bezos had other ideas. In 2005, Amazon launched Prime. Today, that sounds completely normal. At the time, many observers thought the economics looked absurd. Customers would pay a fixed annual fee and receive unlimited two-day shipping. Critics immediately spotted the problem. Shipping wasn't free. Every order created costs. Traditional retailers spent years trying to reduce those expenses. Amazon was actively encouraging customers to generate more of them. Most observers focused on logistics. Bezos focused on behavior. The goal wasn't simply moving products faster. The goal was removing friction. Once shipping felt free, customers stopped thinking about delivery costs every time they placed an order. The buying process became easier. Decisions required less effort. Convenience started replacing hesitation. The impact was enormous. Over time, waiting a week for delivery felt slow. Paying extra for shipping felt unreasonable. Expectations changed. Once consumers become accustomed to a better experience, reversing that expectation becomes extremely difficult. Streaming transformed television. Smartphones changed access to information. Amazon reshaped online shopping. By the late 2010s, hundreds of millions of consumers had grown accustomed to faster delivery, lower friction, and near-instant access to products. From the outside, that looked like Amazon's greatest achievement. Hidden beneath that success was an opportunity few people fully understood. Thousands of miles away, a former Google engineer named Colin Huang was studying a completely different problem. Most e-commerce companies were obsessed with efficiency. Search for a product, compare prices, complete the purchase, leave the platform. Huang noticed that some of the fastest-growing technology companies in the world followed a very different model. Social media platforms weren't optimized for efficiency, they were optimized for attention. Facebook users often open the app without a specific goal. Instagram encouraged endless exploration. TikTok became famous for turning a few minutes of curiosity into an hour of scrolling. Huang recognized something that many retailers overlooked. Shopping and entertainment were starting to merge. That realization would eventually create one of the most valuable companies in China. And later, it would help create Temu. That realization became the foundation of Pinduoduo. Most online stores were designed around a simple assumption. Customers arrive because they already know what they want. Someone searches for headphones, compares a few options, makes a purchase, and leaves. Success depends on helping people reach a decision as efficiently as possible. Colin Huang saw a completely different opportunity. What if shopping could resemble entertainment? At first glance, that idea sounds harmless. A closer look reveals why it became so powerful. Nobody opens TikTok knowing exactly which video they want to watch. Netflix users frequently spend more time browsing than selecting. Social media platforms generate billions of hours of engagement because discovery itself becomes rewarding. Huang realized that retail could borrow the same mechanics. Instead of building a better store, he started building an environment people would want to revisit. Group discounts encouraged participation. Limited-time offers introduced urgency. Recommendations constantly changed. New deals replaced old ones before users had time to lose interest. Browsing stopped feeling like a task and started feeling like an experience. Growth followed at an extraordinary pace. Within just a few years, Pinduoduo became one of the fastest-growing companies in Chinese history. Millions of users returned without having a specific shopping list. Curiosity became a powerful acquisition tool. Traditional retailers competed through selection. Amazon won through convenience. Pinduoduo was pursuing something entirely different. Attention itself became the battleground. That distinction would later shape Temu's international strategy. Expansion into the United States wasn't simply an attempt to sell products overseas. A much larger ambition was beginning to emerge. Most Western observers assumed Temu was exporting cheap goods. Reality turned out to be far more interesting. The company was exporting a system that had already proven successful with hundreds of millions of consumers. Retail executives quickly noticed that something unusual was happening. Advertising appeared everywhere. Social media feeds filled with Temu promotions. Influencers showcased giant hauls. Download rankings climbed at remarkable speed. Reports suggested that billions of dollars were being spent acquiring users. Such spending looked almost irrational. Established retailers typically focus on profitability, efficiency, and cost control. Temu appeared willing to sacrifice all three in pursuit of growth. Naturally, that raised a question. Where was the economic advantage coming from? Manufacturing costs explained part of the story. Scale explained another part. Neither fully accounted for the prices consumers were seeing. Attention soon shifted toward a little-known trade provision called de minimis. Most Americans had never heard of it. Policymakers, customs experts, and international retailers knew it very well. Packages entering the United States below a certain value threshold could avoid many duties and administrative requirements. Eventually, that threshold reached $800. A rule originally designed to simplify customs processing suddenly became extremely valuable in the age of global e-commerce. Small packages containing phone cases, charging cables, or inexpensive accessories could move through the system far more efficiently than large commercial shipments. Industry analysts started connecting the dots. Hundreds of millions of low-value parcels were entering the country every year. Before long, the figure exceeded 1 billion annual shipments. Companies such as Temu and Shein had discovered how to operate at a scale few people imagined when the rule was originally created. Suddenly, some of those impossibly low prices began to make a little more sense. Yet another mystery remained. Lower costs help. Faster customs processing helps. Neither explains why a company would spend extraordinary sums attracting customers while earning very little on many individual transactions. Competitors understood that immediately. Matching prices is difficult. Replicating a system built around massive losses is even harder. Concern started spreading throughout the retail industry because low prices can eventually be copied. A deeper advantage is far more dangerous. That's when the conversation shifted away from products and toward behavior. Executives stopped asking why Temu's items were cheap. A more important question emerged. Why were consumers returning so often? For a while, Temu looked like a curiosity. Then it started looking like a threat. Retail executives had seen fast-growing competitors before. Most eventually slowed down. Some ran out of money. Others failed to retain customers. Temu wasn't following that script. User numbers kept climbing. Advertising remained relentless. Download rankings stayed near the top of the charts. What initially looked like an expensive experiment was becoming much harder to dismiss. The first warning signs appeared inside the companies that had the most to lose. Amazon had spent decades building one of the most sophisticated retail operations in history. Walmart generated hundreds of billions in annual revenue. Both companies understood something important. Consumer expectations can change much faster than business models. Once shoppers become accustomed to a new standard, competitors are forced to respond. That's exactly what started happening. In late 2024, Amazon launched Amazon Haul, a marketplace focused on low-cost products shipped directly from China. The move immediately attracted attention because it looked remarkably familiar. For years, Amazon taught consumers to prioritize speed. Suddenly, the company was experimenting with a model built around extremely low prices instead. Industry observers saw the launch as a sign that Temu's influence was becoming impossible to ignore. Walmart faced a different challenge. Competing with low prices is difficult. Competing with a platform willing to sacrifice profitability for growth is even harder. Retailers could match certain products. Matching an entire ecosystem built around aggressive discounts, constant discovery, and massive advertising budgets was another matter entirely. Meanwhile, Shein continued expanding rapidly, creating an uncomfortable reality for established players. Temu was no longer a single competitor. It was part of a broader shift in global commerce. direct from manufacturer marketplaces were gaining momentum and consumers were responding enthusiastically. Investors noticed, analysts noticed, policymakers noticed. Questions surrounding the de minimis exemption moved from trade publications into mainstream discussions. Lawmakers began examining whether rules designed decades earlier still made sense in an era where more than 1 billion low-value shipments entered the United States annually. Trade groups argued that domestic businesses were operating under different conditions. Supporters countered that consumers benefited from greater choice and lower prices. The debate grew louder. That's usually what happens when a company stops competing with rivals and starts changing an industry. At this point, the story was no longer about phone cases, charging cables, or kitchen gadgets. The real issue was becoming much larger. If Temu continued growing, competitors would have to adapt. If regulators changed the rules, the economics behind global e-commerce could shift. If neither happened, consumers might begin expecting a level of affordability that many traditional retailers would struggle to match. For the first time, the question wasn't whether Temu could survive. The question was whether the rest of the industry could ignore it. Success attracts attention. Extraordinary success attracts resistance. By the mid-2020s, Temu had grown far beyond the stage where it could be dismissed as another fast-growing shopping app. The platform was forcing conversations inside boardrooms, government offices, and investment firms. Retail giants were studying its expansion closely. Trade organizations questioned whether existing rules still reflected the realities of modern commerce. Policymakers began examining the growing volume of low-value imports entering the country. Questions emerged from every direction, yet they all pointed toward the same uncertainty. Could this model continue operating at the same scale forever? Several factors made the debate unusually intense. Consumers loved low prices. Competitors worried about the precedent those prices were creating. Investors wanted to understand how growth would eventually translate into sustainable profits. Regulators faced pressure to determine whether frameworks designed decades earlier were still appropriate for a world connected by digital marketplaces and global supply chains. What made the situation especially interesting was the speed at which everything unfolded. Companies usually spend years building national recognition. Temu achieved that in a fraction of the time. Advertising campaigns accelerated awareness, but awareness alone cannot explain why millions of people kept returning. Many businesses have spent enormous sums promoting products that consumers quickly forgot. Temu managed to become part of everyday behavior for a growing number of users. That achievement changed the nature of the conversation. Early critics focused on prices. Later discussions centered on trade rules. Eventually, attention shifted toward a more important issue: consumer expectations. Retail history repeatedly shows that once people become accustomed to a better deal, a faster service, or a more convenient experience, persuading them to accept less becomes extraordinarily difficult. Department stores learned that lesson during the rise of e-commerce. Traditional media learned it during the rise of streaming. Large retailers were now confronting a similar challenge. Seen from that perspective, the debate surrounding Temu was never really about inexpensive phone cases or discounted kitchen gadgets. Those products simply made a larger transformation visible. Beneath the surface, technology, logistics, behavioral design, and global supply chains were reshaping how consumers evaluate value itself. Every major disruption eventually reaches a point where the conversation stops being about a company and starts being about the environment that allowed that company to succeed. Temu was rapidly approaching that point. Whether the platform continues growing, slows down, or eventually loses momentum, one reality remains difficult to ignore. Millions of consumers have already experienced a different version of online shopping. Competitors have already adjusted their strategies. Policymakers have already started asking new questions. Markets rarely return to their previous state after changes of that magnitude, which leads to the most important question in this entire story. If Temu isn't the cause of the transformation, what exactly is? Looking back, the strangest part of the Temu story isn't how quickly the company grew. Rapid growth has happened before. What makes Temu different is that so many people are still trying to explain its rise through products alone. Phone cases, kitchen gadgets, charging cables, and discount coupons make the story easy to understand, but they don't explain why the platform became one of the most downloaded shopping apps in the world within such a short period of time. Cheap products helped attract attention. Massive advertising budgets accelerated awareness. Efficient supply chains made expansion possible. Each factor contributed to the outcome. None of them fully explains why millions of consumers kept returning long after their first purchase. A deeper shift had already been taking place across the digital economy. Smartphones placed global marketplaces into people's pockets. Recommendation systems became increasingly effective at predicting interests. Social platforms normalized endless discovery. Streaming services trained audiences to expect immediate access to whatever they wanted, whenever they wanted it. Temu entered a world that had already been transformed by those forces. That's why focusing exclusively on the company risks missing the bigger picture. Imagine removing Temu from the internet tomorrow. Consumer demand for low prices wouldn't disappear. Personalized recommendations wouldn't disappear. Endless scrolling wouldn't disappear. Digital marketplaces would continue competing for attention. Another platform would emerge. Another company would experiment with a slightly different model. The underlying conditions responsible for Temu's success would remain exactly where they are today. History tends to follow that pattern. Disruptive businesses rarely create change entirely on their own. More often, they recognize an opportunity before everyone else does. Amazon recognized that convenience could become a competitive advantage. Netflix recognized that distribution could become digital. Social media platforms recognized that attention could become the most valuable resource online. Temu recognized something equally important. Consumers had become comfortable treating shopping as another form of digital discovery. That realization carries consequences extending far beyond retail. Every recommendation engine becomes smarter. Every marketplace collects more information. Every platform competes more aggressively for time, attention, and engagement. Businesses no longer fight exclusively over products. Increasingly, they compete over habits. Viewed from that perspective, the most dangerous lie in this story was never the belief that Temu's products are cheap. Low prices are easy to copy. Supply chains can be replicated. Marketing budgets can be matched. Consumer habits are far more difficult to challenge once they become established. The real story was never about a $2 phone case. It was about the gradual transformation of online behavior and the companies racing to shape it. Whether Temu dominates the next decade or fades into history is ultimately less important than what its rise reveals. Expectations surrounding convenience, price, and discovery have already changed. Competitors are adapting. Regulators are paying attention. Consumers are adjusting to standards that would have seemed impossible a generation ago. Those shifts won't disappear if a single platform loses momentum. The biggest lesson isn't that Temu found a secret formula for selling inexpensive products. The biggest lesson is that millions of people were already ready for a platform like Temu before it ever existed. The company didn't invent the future of digital commerce. It simply arrived early enough to recognize where that future was heading.